I really wanted to like Longlegs. The very first time I saw a trailer for it, I was excited. It seemed like it was going for that murder mystery, psycho-cultic procedural thriller stuff that I've always been a real sucker for, with the tone and atmosphere of something like Silence of the Lambs, True Detective, or Seven, Sevenin, as I like to call it, and a couple names I recognized and was excited for. Osgood Perkins was behind the movie I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in This House, a movie that I don't see talked about enough. James Wan was responsible for some of this community's favorite movies, stuff like Saw, The Conjuring, and the first horror movie that I ever watched, Insidious. I'm also a big fan of It Follows, so seeing Micah Monroe in another leading role got me pumped, and I'm sure I don't even have to mention Nick Cage. All things considered, I feel like this movie had, and maybe still has, a lot going for it. But despite that, every time I've watched it, I've come out frustrated, confused, and overall disappointed. Is it a bad movie? I don't know. I think there was a lot of thought and effort put into this film, but at the same time, there's a murkiness to this movie's structure and presentation that makes it difficult to judge. Now, this is not the first semi-negative criticism of a well-liked movie I've done on this channel, and it probably won't be the last. If you've been subscribed for a little while, or are one of the few people who seem to exclusively hate watch my videos, you might have seen my Smile review. It's one of the more popular videos on this channel. I stand by a lot of the points I made in that video, but would like to acknowledge that I approached the topic from a very specific and harsh angle. While Smile is still one of the worst movies I've ever seen, I can't help but feel like the tone of that video maybe clouded my genuine criticisms a bit and put too heavy a focus on my emotional reactions rather than what caused them. So, for this video, I'm gonna try to tone down the theatrics a little bit and really clearly explain what my issues are. This will be a lot easier because I don't have the same animosity for Longlegs that I do Smile. Like I said, I wanted to like it. Before we get into the actual film, I want to talk about Oz Perkins a little bit. Oz Perkins is the writer for such movies as Gretel and Hansel, The Blackcoat's Daughter, and of course, Longlegs. He's also a director for The Monkey, a Stephen King adaptation that's getting a lot of hype right now that I haven't seen yet. Now, if his name or face seems a little familiar, it's possible that you might recognize his father, Anthony Perkins, who famously portrayed the character Norman Bates in this little indie horror flick that you might have heard of. Oh, what's it called? Oh yeah, Psycho. So, I have to acknowledge the glaring fact that Oz Perkins is a nepo baby, and he seems to be continuing the tradition with his own daughter, who plays a minor role in Longlegs. Now, don't get me wrong, under the right circumstances, I love a good nepo baby. Jamie Lee Curtis, Maya Hawke, Lily Rose Depp, just because you have famous parents doesn't mean you're lacking in talent. What it can mean, though, is that you're given attention or opportunities you might not deserve. His movies have all been pretty divisive, and yet he keeps making them for better or for worse. As a random Redditor commented about Longlegs, it feels like he makes 3-star films that look like 5-star films. And I can't help but agree with that, at least to some extent. Longlegs looks fucking incredible. I really want to stress this point. I almost think that watching the movie on mute without subtitles would be a wildly more compelling experience than what we actually got. I don't know how responsible Oz is for the framing, shot composition, character design, and ambiance of the movie, but all of those things seriously work for the film, to enough of a degree that I think the majority of the people who like this film are responding primarily to those elements. Unfortunately, the things that I pay attention to the most in movies like this are dialogue, motivation, characterization, and internal logic, which is where, in my opinion, Longlegs sort of falls apart. So let's talk about it. I think I have 3 specific issues with Longlegs that kind of lessen the appeal of the movie for me. I'll list them all now, but I'll have to go through a summary of the movie to show you what I actually mean. But before that, here they are. Number 1. A lot of the dialogue in this movie is cheesy, cliched, and/or delivered very poorly. I immediately think of the Carrie Ann camera scene, a scene that a ton of people really love, where actress Kiernan Shipka, who I usually like, delivers a vague monologue about her encounter with the main antagonist of the movie, where she's speaking with a regional dialect that just sounds so acted coming out of her mouth, if you know what I mean.
Boy, I just want to do whatever so he says me to do. Like if he told me to take a jumpy out a window, I'd surely do.
It's not that people from rural parts of America don't use the verbiage like she uses, and I understand that she was catatonic prior to the scene, however, it just sounds unnatural coming from her. And not in a way that supports the atmosphere of the scene, but rather detracts from it. I think that her accent isn't strong enough to support her line deliveries, which makes it seem like she's just reading something off of a script. I know people will disagree with me on this particular scene, but it's not the only one where the dialogue feels suddenly far too performative. Number 2, I don't understand a lot of the motivation and choices that multiple characters have and make in this movie. For example, at the very end of the film, once our protagonist, Lee Harker, is fully aware of how the families are being murdered and what's controlling those families, she seemingly allows a woman to get murdered in front of her. The man she's been working the case with implies pretty clearly that he's going to go murder his wife in the other room with a knife, and instead of A, destroying the doll that is controlling him, or B, trying to stop her partner, she just watches as the two of them leave the room, listens as the wife clearly gets stabbed to death, and only shoots the man when he comes back out and lunges for her and his daughter. Why didn't she do anything before? Clearly she was capable of using her gun because she does twice in this scene, despite whatever implied paranormal influence she might be under, which should be none due to her mother destroying her own doll. So why did she wait until after an innocent woman was killed to do anything about it? Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of random information at you, and if you haven't seen the movie, it probably doesn't make much sense, but I'll give you the context for this scene in our summary, so just hold on. And number 3, I find the actual conclusion and answer to the mystery to be incredibly basic and uninspired, not to mention confusing in a way that backs up my previous issue. In a movie that is primarily about solving a mystery, no matter how good your lead-up is, and there were elements of it that I can easily say were good, if your conclusion is disappointing, that ruins all the work the movie did getting you there. So, those are the 3 specific issues that stand out the most in this film. And as we go through a brief summary of its narrative now, I'll try to point out instances when these issues pop up. It shouldn't be too difficult. Longlegs has a very strong opening, shot on 35mm film with a 4:3 aspect ratio, a framing that we later learn indicates that we're seeing a scene from the past. It's the 1970s, and we're introduced to a house, a little girl, and our antagonist. Cage's performance as Longlegs is absolutely one of the strongest positives of this film. I know we as a culture have gotten into this really divided place on Nick Cage as a performer, but wherever you lay on that scale, you have to admit that when he commits to a role, he really commits. This opening scene with Cage sets the tone for the rest of the film, a tone necessary for its critical success. The dialogue exchange here is short, vague, just enough for you to realize how uncomfortable and strange Cage's performance will be. He's framed in a way that emphasizes both his size and his strangeness, his eyes hidden above where the camera reaches. He speaks with a soft and almost congested, sing-songy voice, greeting the almost birthday girl and referencing how he's worn his long legs today.
It seems I wore my long legs today.
Before suddenly crouching down to the girl's level. We only get a short glimpse of the man's face before a screaming intro begins, and we get into the meat of the film. It took me a second to understand why the character was calling himself Longlegs, but this scene answers that question. It's a reference to how imposing the character is in comparison to children, how he towers over them. In this introductory scene, it's a strong idea, but I can't help but feel that his name might have been more impactful had we seen the idea stressed a little further throughout the film, potentially with more child characters. There might be an argument that certain scenes with dolls do this, but as far as I can tell, this is the only scene that really draws attention to the character's height and build, save for its extension later in the film. There's also a heavy focus on the family structure in this movie, specifically fathers, and the name Longlegs might evoke the idea of the bug Daddy Longlegs, which has led some viewers to the theory that Longlegs was Harker's father, a theory I don't believe to be true. After the opening credits of the film, we're introduced to our protagonist, Special Agent Lee Harker, played by Micah Monroe. She works for the FBI, and we're introduced to her character right at the beginning of a manhunt, where we're told the man they're looking for has been targeting specific types of neighborhoods and should be considered armed and dangerous. The scene moves to Harker and her assigned partner investigating one neighborhood, and if you're wondering what her partner's name is, I wouldn't worry about it. It's not really going to matter in a second. Harker's personality is muted to a certain degree, in a way that might be read in a couple of different ways. It seems from interviews with the director that Monroe played the character with the idea of portraying someone on the spectrum, which, if true, I think she accomplishes. She seems reserved, anxious, and non-sociable, but incredibly observant and capable, in a way that might be familiar to those who interact with, and especially work with, people with autism. There's also an element to her performance which is expanded upon later that also might indicate some trauma in her past. To clarify, the man they're looking for here isn't Longlegs. As far as I know, Harker isn't even aware of that case quite yet. This scene serves more to introduce the idea that Harker is kind of psychic, I guess. With very little information or reason, Harker points to a specific house in the neighborhood, number 3525, and confidently tells her partner the man they're looking for is in there. Her partner, reasonably, seems hesitant to call in for backup on what is, in his eyes, a hunch, but checks the house out anyway, knocking on the door, greeting the man who answers it, and immediately getting shot in the head. Told you his name didn't matter. Harker, gun drawn and breathing heavily, enters the house, where she finds the man sitting in a room upstairs, where he surrenders easily and time for me to call out one of my first issues. If this guy, who I'm not certain is given a name, was willing to execute an FBI agent in broad daylight, assumedly to avoid capture, why would he suddenly give up when a second FBI agent, who had lost visual on him, entered the house he was hiding in? Would it not have made more sense to either flee out the other side of the house in the brief period of time he was given during Harker's recovery, or to set up so that he could take her out too? I don't believe that this character is under the influence of any doll magic, we'll get to that later, currently, so why does he just surrender? It's not a movie-breaking issue, but I do think it illustrates, at least on a small scale, the style over substance approach this movie sometimes takes. But let's move on. I'm not sure how the Bureau knows that Harker had a psychic encounter if they didn't call it in before the shooting, but regardless, the next scene is Harker in a dark room, being shown random, abstract projected slides and saying the first word that comes to her mind. She also is asked to predict a number between 0 and 100 from a random number generator. The scene establishes the efficacy of her psychic abilities. Finally, the movie introduces us to the actual mystery. Harker is given the details of the Longlegs case by Agent Carter, the person she'll be working with for the rest of the movie. Apparently, the case is so strange, and Harker's success rate for the random generator was 50%, so she's been deemed a half-psychic asset for a case that, admittedly, makes no rational sense. Apparently, over the past 30 years, there were 10 family murder cases that all followed the same strange pattern. The father of each family, who was typically not violent prior to these events, killed everyone in his family before taking his own life. In each of these crime scenes, a coded message was left with simply the name Longlegs. It seems like none of these coded messages have managed to be cracked. Now, what is strange about this is that it seems that the murders were likely caused by this unknown Longlegs character, and yet there was never any evidence of there being another person in the house during these murders. Harker had a few theories that potentially the fathers were blackmailed or influenced somehow, but there are still too many questions to make sense of things, and that's why Harker's been brought on the case. The final interesting piece of information about this case that seems exceptionally relevant to mention is the fact that every single family had a daughter whose birthday was on the 14th of any given month, which leads me to another criticism. We find out, spoilers, that both the daughter of Agent Carter and Lee Harker herself have birthdays which fall on the 14th. Now, I'm not an FBI agent, as far as you know, and I recognize that this coincidence is not necessarily enough to necessitate a change in operation or behavior, but it at least seems to be worth mentioning, right? If I were investigating a case like this and realized that my non-existent daughter fit the same qualities as these murder victims, I'd probably bring it up at least with the other people working with me on the case. I'd do the same thing if I was a woman whose birthday fell on the date. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are the target. With a case this strange, wouldn't you want to cover your bases? If this fact was introduced more subtly or was pieced together over the course of the film, I'd have less of a problem with it, but since Carter actively cites this being a part of the killer's MO, it seems like a weird unnecessary issue of communication, especially later when Harker is literally invited to his daughter's birthday party. We hear a 911 call made by one of the murderous fathers before his assault where he claims, "It's my daughter. It's not my daughter," which obviously raises some questions. For now though, Harker starts working the case, which appears to be having a profound effect on her psyche. This isn't in my script, but I really enjoy how we're shown all the crime scene photos with the sound of the phone call playing over it. It's pretty intense and it really sets the mood. Harker ends up meeting Carter's daughter, as mentioned earlier, and this scene really showcases how awkward Harker is with other people, especially children specifically. There are a couple of interesting lines during the scene, specifically a mention of veal and how it grows up with its legs all tied up, which I read as being an allusion to Harker growing up in a sort of restrained and uncomfortable setting, an idea which is backed up later when Harker calls her mom from her home. Harker seems worried about her mother, who admittedly speaks with a strange and stilted inflection.
Somebody's birthday coming up.
And a Christian focus that Harker doesn't seem to share. She also mentions that Harker's birthday is coming up, signifying the possibility that Harker shares an important birth date with the murdered girls from her case. This conversation is interrupted by a banging at the door. Harker immediately draws her gun, and we can assume she isn't often visited at home. The lingering shots of these scenes, as well as others, do a great job of creating the expectation of a hidden figure or jump scare, but often nothing comes from them, leaving a lingering dread over us as the scene continues. Harker leaves the house in pursuit of whoever was knocking, only to turn around and see someone in her own home through the window. When she re-enters, there's no one there except for a letter, which interestingly gives Harker a cipher that is necessary for cracking Longlegs' codes. The note also warns Harker not to share how she decodes the secret messages with the threat of killing her mother. So here are two questions I have about this scene. Question 1. How in the hell does this person, whoever they are, probably Longlegs, get in and out of Harker's house without being caught? This is the house of an FBI agent with anxiety issues. You have to imagine she'd have some kind of defenses for the house, a security camera, anything. anything, but the person is just gone when she gets into the house. Is Longlegs operating with further supernatural abilities than the ones we're told outright he possesses near the end of the movie? Or are we supposed to believe that this is a result of incompetence or failed observation from someone we know to have a great level of perception and insight? We do learn later that the source of Harker's powers is more nefarious than we're originally led to believe, so maybe she's being led astray. However, it seems that those very powers were what originally made her aware of the incoming intruder, so it all seems rather unlikely. How did she fully miss this person? Question 2. What exactly is the purpose of Longlegs leaving this essential clue for Harker? Jumping ahead a little bit in the narrative, we learn that all of these murders have a lot more to do with Harker and her family than expected, and therefore, the conclusion this movie receives, where Harker is forced to make a violent and heartbreaking decision, might have been intentional, which could indicate that this letter, which really does break the case wide open, is just meant to lead her down this path. If that's the case, however, it seems very arbitrary. The motivation behind Longlegs' murders and how that ties to Harker's life is seemingly random, and yet by the time Harker is an adult, it seems like it's all about her, which, while not terrible, is a little confusing in the face of the satanic angle. It also makes a whole lot of assumptions about how exactly this whole investigation will unfold and how Harker will respond to certain events. Like many of my criticisms of this movie, these moments aren't obtrusive, nor are they completely immersion-breaking. However, the level of thinking necessary to parse them and the assumptions we as a community and I as an analyst have to make for it all to make sense just aren't very satisfying in the way certain other open-ended horror movies manage to be. I'm genuinely curious to hear what you all think. Why did Harker get this letter? Are you satisfied with how this opens the case up and where it leads Harker? As the investigation continues, the FBI becomes aware of another murder scene that fits Longlegs' modus operandi. The family was thought to be on vacation, so they had been rotting in their house for around a month. All of the investigators are appropriately disgusted by the scene, especially at the fact that the daughter was around 9 or 10. What follows is perhaps my least favorite scene in the movie, maybe right after the Carrie Ann camera scene, which I've already explained my criticisms towards. In this scene, Harker introduces Carter to the concept of Longlegs' algorithm, which is, to simplify, that by taking all of the dates of the murders and how they compare to the daughter of each household's birthday, when aligned in a certain pattern and folded, creates an inverted triangle, which is implied to have significance in its resemblance of the traditional sigil of Lucifer. That's all well and good, but I can't help but agree with Carter when he says, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? The issue I have here with this scene, and honestly just this specific part of it, is twofold. The first part is simply that, like many of the other powerful symbols and ideas utilized in this film, its inclusion as part of Longlegs' motivation is just kind of arbitrary. Sure, he's making a symbol that's traditionally associated with evil, but what's he doing it for? Just for kicks? Does it empower the devil in some way? Is it for Harker's sake? I really don't know, and unfortunately don't think the greater film gives us enough information to satisfyingly form our own conclusion. The second part, though, has a lot more to do with the third of my 3 major criticisms, which, as I mentioned earlier, is that the ending is unsatisfying. During my first watch of this film, I was under the impression that all of the satanic and biblical references in this movie were metaphorical, that they had more to do with the villain's psychology and system of beliefs than anything else, and that led to a lot of theorizing on my part. What does this symbol represent literally? Should I be viewing Longlegs as a sort of Luciferian stand-in, a figure of rebellion? If so, against what? Is there a larger symbolism attached to the triangle, and will it figure into the plot in a way that adds to the cultish and psychological elements of the story? It made the first watch a bit more exciting because I thought there was more to think about than what was just on the surface. Cut to the reveal that everything happening has to do literally with the devil, and suddenly most of this stuff isn't a metaphor anymore, it's just devil shit, which I'm pretty good at recognizing by this point in my life as a horror fan and someone who at one point in his life took a great interest in Satanism and Levianism. In my opinion, which is of course fallible, the most effective usages of these types of symbols are in metaphor and reference. To see it just refer to the devil with no further expression or meaning is frustrating, because it could be used for so much more. Anyway, Harker by this point has decoded all of Longlegs' messages, and how she did this, especially from Carter's perspective, is kind of brushed past in service of giving us our next reveal, which is the relevance of Carrie Ann Camera and the Camera family farm. They decide to go to the Camera family farm first because it's closer, which is pretty lucky for Longlegs' plan, because if they discovered things out of order, then they likely would have had a very different interaction with Carrie Ann. This is what I mean when I say that Longlegs is making a lot of assumptions about how the case will unfold and how Harker will respond to it. But that's a minor nitpick, so let's just move on. In the Camera family farm, Harker and Carter discover a doll in a hidden hatch that apparently resembles Carrie Ann Camera, which for some reason they bring to a coroner. I'm not sure why he's the one investigating the doll, but what I am sure of is that this guy is an absolute creep. Not as creepy as Longlegs, who we have another encounter with in the next scene, but a creep nonetheless. There's this little metal ball in the doll that the coroner has taken to calling the brain because he's a creep. The ball's also been talking to the coroner. I guess there's no reason to be concerned about that. We get this brief moment where Longlegs goes shopping and has a strange interaction with an apathetic girl behind the checkout counter. Small bit of trivia, this actress, Beatrix Perkins, is the daughter daughter of the director. Again, it's technically nepotism, but if my dad was making a horror movie, I'd think it was cool if he gave me a small part in it. It's not like she's a hugely important character in the script, so what's the harm? On the drive back home, Longlegs, without any warning, bursts into a fit of semi-musical screams, like something out of a punk or metal album, shouting, "Daddy! Mommy! Unmake me and save me from the hell of living." Banger moment, truly. Honestly iconic. Just a bit of random characterization performed well with nothing to distract from the performance. We're back to Carter and Harker now, and they're interviewing the head of the psych ward where Carrie Ann Camera is being held, who honestly seems a little incompetent in his position. He's taking his job a little too casually, and when security issues are brought to his attention, he seems receptive to them, but it's like he had never considered them before this moment. This does serve the story a little. Later, Carrie Ann will jump off the roof of the facility, and in another movie, I might ask how she was able to make it to the roof in the first place, but honestly, the vibe of this scene presents such a frivolous attitude towards patient care that it kind of explains why no one kept an eye on her. We learn that Carrie Ann had been catatonic until yesterday, coinciding with the discovery of the doll, and that she apparently had a visitor. When looking into the visitor check-in sheet, it appears that whoever visited Carrie Ann, again, probably Longlegs, signed in as Lee Harker, once again indicating that this case has to do heavily with Harker somehow. Finally, we get to genuinely my least favorite scene in the movie, and it's the one I mentioned before, the interview with Carrie Ann Camera. The part that frustrates me is that the things she is saying are interesting and relevant to the plot, and yet I can't take it seriously due to the dialect they have her using. I don't want to rehammer the point home, but I'll open the floor to all of you again. Does this scene work for you? Does the dialogue seem unnatural, or am I just being nitpicky here? Either way, here's what we learn. When Carrie Ann Camera was born, she did some real damage to her mother, which affected their relationship. I don't know if this is completely relevant or just a bit of tone setting. Carrie Ann's father was apparently a good man, but it seems at some point that something changed in him, as per the usual Longlegs killing, and he axed Carrie Ann's mom. We also hear about Carrie Ann's visitor, the one who used Harker's name, and though it's clearly implied to be Longlegs, we also hear mention of the man down the stairs, who I immediately clocked as being the devil, even though I think the naming convention is meant to keep it at least partially vague. It becomes clear that Carrie Ann is under the influence of someone, and would be willing to do anything to herself or others due to this influence. She also mentions her doll, with the implication that somehow Harker had one too that she forgot about. Moving on from this scene, Harker and Carter have a discussion about the case, passing back and forth ideas. Harker seems to imply, correctly, that Longlegs is somehow capable of influencing people with dolls, an idea that Carter shoots down. I'm not sure why he's willing to believe in Harker's psychic powers, but not Longlegs's, but oh well. Carter finally acknowledges Harker's birthday while still failing to mention his daughter's, guess it's not as important to him, and asks Harker to go visit her mother, who apparently filed a police report a day before her birthday back in 1974 about an intruder who, spoilers, looks a lot like Longlegs. Harker has no memory of this, so off she goes. Harker's mom is not all there, it seems. Her house is a bit of a mess. She speaks in a stilted and disconnected tone and seems heavily fixated on Christian themes, as we got a brief glimpse of earlier. It's clear that she cares about her daughter, however, there is an unsettling quality to this care. When questioned about that day in 1974, her mom gives strange half answers, first outright denying any memory of the time, but then admitting that she seemingly intentionally forgot about it and protected Harker from it. When pushed, she reveals that she kept a box of evidence, I guess, in Harker's room, which Harker opens, revealing to herself and the audience that the girl from the opening scene was her, and that during her initial encounter with Longlegs, she took a picture of him. Now, I have to break into the summary again to point out another thing that confuses me here. As mentioned before, I think the best shot I can give to Longlegs' motivation for giving Harker so many clues is that he wants her to reach a specific point by the end of the mystery. But it's not a point that I think Harker's mother would also be interested in. Big spoiler here, but later in the film, it's revealed that Longlegs and the mother are working together, that she was the accomplice, and the information that Harker receives here puts her so much closer to figuring this out. Sure, maybe this benefits Longlegs, but how could it possibly benefit Harker's mother? It's not like she wants to be stopped. The film implies that her devotion to her role in these murders is for Harker's sake, so why put herself in the danger of being stopped, especially by Harker? I'm really not sure about this. Anyway, Harker finds this Polaroid, which triggers a flashback to that opening scene, where her mother comes out and, in much more normal cadence, confronts Longlegs about why he's on the property talking to her daughter. He then, once again, bursts out into song. Truly, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this film, but the character of Longlegs and Cage's performance are truly killer, and strange in just the right way. Harker shows the Polaroid to her partner, they put out an APB for the man, and Longlegs, an admittedly very recognizable face, is quickly found and arrested. The arresting officer says, and I quote, "Sir, I'm gonna need you to get down on the fucking ground." A delivery that I hate. During the ensuing police interview, we learn that Longlegs' real name is Dale Ferdinand Cobble. He asks specifically for Harker, but doesn't clarify exactly how he knows her, and instead just starts singing Happy Birthday. We cut to a briefing room where Harker and a number of her colleagues are watching this recorded interview, and it's revealed that he kept on singing like that for 24 minutes straight. Harker agrees to go interrogate Cobble because she realizes that his vague, triangle-based algorithm is still missing a date, the 13th, which is today. Again, you gotta wonder why Carter isn't at least a little concerned about his daughter, but oh well. Harker believes the accomplice will kill again, so she goes to try to get the information she needs out of Cobble. Their interaction is brief, confusing, and ends with a bang. Or several, I guess. Cobble is delighted to see Harker, but won't answer any of her questions straight, instead using metaphor, mentioning a vague she, playing the pronoun game and leading Harker to ask who she is, though context clearly points toward it being the mother. Apparently he's been offering a choice to people, Crimson or Clover, to be destroyed or, to paraphrase, become the destroyer themselves. I love how he delivers this line about bowing down, bowing all the way down, and getting to the dirty work. A delivery that sounds, again, almost like a punk or metal preamble, but also insinuates that his accomplice was someone who at one point was also his victim. He implies that this accomplice is someone who could get close to the families without them suspecting anything, disguised as a member of the church, which, if you've been paying attention, clearly points to the only other hugely religious figure we've encountered in the film, Harker's mom, who by now Harker knows has interacted with Longlegs, but to the extent of which is still unclear. Longlegs ends the scene, and his time on Earth, by telling Harker to go ask her mommy what happened, hailing Satan before bashing himself to death against the table. Carter is pretty upset about how things went, and I'm a little confused about what he's upset about. He states that, 1, Carrie Ann camera jumped off the roof, so in his mind that settles the 13th date in the algorithm, though from our and Harker's perspective that clearly doesn't fit the same structure of the other dates, so it's unsatisfying, and 2, that they quote, had the guy and now they got nothing, which I guess if you wanted him in prison might be upsetting, but either way, the person who Carter believes to be solely responsible for the murders is gone, so I wouldn't be too pressed about it. Maybe he wanted to get more information out of Longlegs, but at this point, getting mad at Harker doesn't make much sense. It's not like Harker killed him. I considered at one point that the rage might be him starting to fall under the effects of his daughter's doll, but upon further consideration, I don't think he encounters that doll until a little later. Whatever. Harker and another random agent whose name I don't remember go to pick Harker's mom up, but hey, remember when I couldn't remember that other agent's name? Well, we're continuing the trend. The least observant FBI agent of all time gets her head blown off by a shotgun, and only after the gunshot rings out does Harker head towards her mom. She finds her mother holding the gun to the head of what looks like a little girl, but is revealed to be a doll of Harker. She does the doll just like she did the agent, blasting its head off, and this causes Harker to fall unconscious, a bit of black smoke drifting out of her head. This is the devil's metaphysical influence, the source of her psychic abilities, leaving her. We get given a lot of story through a sort of flashback dream sequence here, and while I don't love the delivery, as it feels a little shoehorned in, I'll summarize what I understand to be the big revelation of the mystery here. When Harker was younger, and living with her mother, she was one of the first families to be visited by Longlegs, or Cobble as I'll call him from now on. Cobble was a doll maker who managed to put small pieces of either the devil or at least a substance the devil could control into these dolls, the brain thing that creepy coroner mentioned. He would give these dolls over to families where they would slowly and terribly influence the majority of the family, but mostly of the father, who at a certain point would be directed by the doll to murder his family, then himself. However, Harker's father, for whatever reason, wasn't in the picture, so when Cobble went to murder them, he had to be a bit more physical about it, restraining the mother so he could kill them both. However, somehow, Harker's mother made a deal for Harker's life, that she would act as an accomplice to these murders, so long as Cobble left their family alone. We realized that the basement where Cobble was constructing these dolls was the basement of Harker's childhood home. Harker's mother would go to each of the families, pretending to be a member of the church with a gift, that gift being the devilish doll, and as soon as it was in the house, the family's fate was sealed. Harker's mother hated what she was doing, but was slowly warped over time by a number of factors, likely guilt and exposure to the devil, but she continued to convince herself that what she was doing was for Harker's benefit, and that she was protecting her from the devil and hell itself. When Harker comes to, she realizes that her mother is going to give a doll to Carter's daughter, whose birthday party is today. She drives to the house screaming in terror and frustration, but manages to arrive in time. Now, before we end this summary, movie, and video, I want to say something. When I first started writing this script, I had a lot more negative feelings about this movie. I thought it was bad, illogical, confusing, lacking in depth, and some of those feelings still remain within me. I'm not personally into the devil being a primary antagonist in horror movies, just because it feels so easy to utilize a figure that to many represents evil in its most absolute form, and so, as I mentioned earlier, it made the ending disappointing for me. But while I was writing this script, and I was reading the transcript of the movie, and articles about the film, and Reddit threads, and other videos, I started realizing that maybe I had missed something, that I had been so caught up in trying to deduce and judge that I had put blinders on. The scene at the end of the movie, which I've already touched on, definitely has some strange choices choices, like Harker failing to prevent the death of Carter's wife, or waiting to try and destroy the doll until after violence had already occurred, but it also did something that I needed to write this script to understand. It made a claim. I'm not a Christian, but I know a lot about the Bible. My close family includes a couple believers. I've gone to camps for it and researched specific elements for previous fiction writings. I had that brief stint of being into Satanism conceptually, and of course, most importantly, I watch Wendigo. Because of this combination of elements, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the devil. God too, I guess, but look at me. Which one of these two figures would someone like me find more conceptually interesting? The thing about the devil is that he's a trickster, and his influence tends to manifest in ways that seem very pointed, very personal. Of course, on a grander scale, the devil exists as an adversary to God and heaven. His name, Satan, literally translates to adversary in Hebrew, but as it comes to humanity, he's a corrupter, a negative influence, someone who not only wants to spread evil, but who wants you to spread evil. Free will, as it exists in the Bible, dictates that you get a choice between aligning yourself with divinity or sin. So while God is trying to lead you down a path of righteousness, of goodness and love, so too is the devil trying to lead you towards evil, selfishness, and dishonesty. You get to make a choice, but unfortunately, only one of these two massive figures is willing to lie to you, to manipulate you and force your hand. At least that's what Christians believe. The ending of Longlegs makes a claim, and it's that the devil has won. Not in a big way, not in a usurping God's throne kind of way, but in the way that the devil always wins, by cultivating, through whatever means, the spread of violence and terror on an individual scale. Harker shoots Carter as he lunges at her and his daughter, and then, as a desperate pleading form of self-defense, she puts a bullet into her mother's head. Was she trying to protect someone? Sure, but the damage has been done. Longlegs' plan is complete. The devil created a violent and chaotic enough scenario that multiple lives were either ended or permanently affected for the worse. Harker did something she never wanted, took a life she was always desperate to protect, was led unknowingly by the devil for years to this very moment, and when she tries to destroy the doll, she can't. Her gun jams. This final failure is representative of so much more than just a weapon malfunction. It means that by now, even if she wanted to, Harker can't fight back. There's not a weapon at her disposal that can undo the damage that has been done. She's lost everything. Her mother, her friend, and most likely herself. And with a Cajun wink to the camera, the film ends on a shot of Cobble, of Longlegs, in the interrogation room, saying once again, "Hail Satan," and it's over. This has been a complicated movie for me to analyze. I really wanted to give the film the respect it deserves, and approach the ending through the lens I think it was intended to be viewed. Unfortunately, the meaning and the power of the revelation I just mentioned is one that is lessened by some of the poorer choices in this movie's production, but I just can't decide how to feel about it. I think, to be totally honest, all I can do is split my opinions about it. I think it looks great, but has bad writing sometimes. I think some of the performances are powerful, and that others are distracting. I think its message is interesting, but poorly conveyed. I think it's a good movie with bad moments. Or maybe a bad movie with good moments. I'm certainly not going to fall into the same trap of my Smile video, where I judge someone based on their opinion of the movie. It didn't sit well with me then, and it wouldn't now. I totally get the perspective of people who love this movie, and I understand the people who think it's overrated. Really, the reason I made this video was to sort through the complicated feelings I have over a piece of art like this. And it is art, whether I like it or not. Thought and care and love was put into it, and whether or not I was affected by the film, I can't deny that. So even if I don't know how to feel about this film, that's okay. I can say at least one thing with certainty. It was better than Smile.